The phone vibrated against the worn leather of my desk, a simple sound that carried a weight I could not have imagined. I reached for it casually, expecting perhaps a reminder or a routine message. Instead, the screen lit up with a sentence, so cold, so deliberate, that it pierced straight through my chest. "We need space from both of you." I was shocked when I looked at the sender name. The message was sended by my own son, Matthew. I sat frozen, my fingers trembling, unable to comprehend the enormity of what I was reading. For decades, I had built a life of sacrifice for my children, especially for Matthew, the son whose small hands I had held through scraped knees, whose late-night tears I had comforted, whose every success I had nurtured. And now, in a single line, all of that devotion seemed meaningless, dismissed as if it were nothing more than air. The room around me felt smaller, darker, as though the walls themselves had drawn closer to witness the sudden fracture in my family. My name is Richard Caldwell, 58 years old. I had spent my life working, earning, and giving, always believing that love, patience, and sacrifice could shield my children from hardship and disappointment. The truth, I realized now, was harsher. Love alone could not ensure gratitude, respect, or loyalty. Lavra, my wife of 34 years, stood quietly behind me, her hand lightly resting on my shoulder. She had endured these years alongside me, shared the weight of endless sacrifices, and silently supported decisions I often made without consultation. Her presence was calming, but it could not soften the sting of betrayal. Olivia, our daughter, watched from a distance, her eyes wide and cautious, sensing the first real fissure in the family's foundation. Matthew, my son, the child for whom I had given my life, had made it clear that my presence was no longer welcome. I sank into my chair, heart pounding, memories flooding every corner of my mind. I remembered nights spent hunched over ledgers, working overtime to cover tuition and living expenses, weekends forfeited, celebrations skipped, moments of personal happiness deferred, all to ensure that Matthew could have everything I never had. I had imagined those efforts would translate to respect, to love, to acknowledgement. And yet, the message on my phone contradicted every expectation, cutting deeper than any argument or disappointment could. The house, our home for decades, felt suddenly alien. The shadows stretched unnaturally along the walls, the winter sunlight barely creeping through heavy curtains, the faint scent of tobacco and old leather heavy in the air. I traced my gaze over the photographs on the shelves, frozen smiles of birthdays, graduations, family vacations, moments I had treasured, now feeling almost ironic in their permanence. Every image seemed to mock me, a reminder of the love and effort that had been taken for granted. I thought of the subtle signs I had ignored, the small betrayals I had dismissed. Over the years, Matthew's avoidance of family dinners, his sudden irritability when I offered advice, the whispers I could hear when my back was turned, the furtive glances he cast when he believed I was unaware. Each act had seemed minor, negligible even, but collectively they had grown into a chasm between us, one I had refused to see until it could no longer be ignored. And yet, amidst the storm of shock, grief, and disbelief, a quiet resolve began to form. I remembered the bank balance I had secretly set aside years ago, untouched and unknown to Matthew. It had been intended as a safety net, a means to protect him, perhaps even to secure a family emergency. But now it became a potential instrument of revelation, a way to show, silently and irrevocably, the depth of sacrifices he had failed to appreciate. I reflected on my own life with a sharp, aching clarity. The years of hard work, the nights spent awake worrying, the moments of quiet pride in my children's successes, all of it had been motivated by love and hope. And now, the absence of gratitude, the casual dismissal, the outright rejection, forced me to consider consequences, not out of anger, not out of malice, but from a deep understanding that actions have outcomes, and the decisions we make toward those we love define the respect they accord us. I allowed myself to remember specific instances of my dedication. The night I worked late at the office while Matthew prepared for an important college interview, knowing he would benefit from my efforts the following morning. The mornings I skipped breakfast to ensure bills were paid, tuition secured, and my children's future protected. The countless small gestures unnoticed, the silent encouragements, the hidden pride I carried for their smallest victories. All of it, it seemed, had been dismissed. With a single sentence, Lavra moved quietly across the room, her hand brushing mine, a gesture of reassurance. Together, we had survived trials that would have broken lesser bonds, financial setbacks, health crises, and the slow erosion of familial respect over time. Now this betrayal was simply another test, sharper and more intimate than any we had faced, yet no less manageable with the perspective and patience life had taught us. Olivia's eyes remained on me, a mix of sympathy and quiet fear. She understood the gravity of Matthew's rejection, but also sensed the undercurrent of resolve that now coursed through me. My daughter had always been observant, noticing subtleties that Matthew either ignored or concealed. Her presence, though quiet, strengthened my determination to endure, to act with foresight rather than impulsive emotion. The fire in the hearth cast flickering shadows across the room, illuminating dust particles dancing in the weak winter light. Outside, the wind rattled the old window panes, a hollow sound that echoed the turmoil within me. I felt my pulse quicken, yet beneath it all lay the ember of patience. I would not respond hastily. I would wait, observing, calculating, and preparing for a moment that would reveal truth without confrontation. The hidden bank balance would speak volumes when the time was right, illustrating a lifetime of dedication that had gone unnoticed and undervalued. In the days that followed, I noticed Matthew's growing detachment more acutely. Small actions, once overlooked, now appeared deliberate. His refusal to engage in casual conversation, his subtle avoidance of eye contact, his brief, curt replies. Every gesture, every hesitation reinforced the sense of distance he had created, a chasm I had neither expected nor invited. And yet, I recognized that this distance was temporary, a window for reflection, for revelation, a space in which the consequences of ingratitude could be revealed with clarity. I walked through the house slowly, observing the rooms filled with memories. Each photograph, each memento, each trophy and certificate spoke of years, of effort, of sacrifices made quietly, without expectation of recognition. And in every room, I sensed the absence of respect, the cold presence of entitlement that had replaced gratitude. The emotional weight of this realization pressed down upon me, yet it also clarified my path. I would not bend. I would not beg. I would wait for the moment when truth would reveal itself, when Matthew would confront the reality of what he had dismissed. The night deepened, the storm outside rising with gusts of wind that rattled the shutters. I sat once more at my desk, reflecting on decades of work, love, and patience. Every dollar earned, every sleepless night endured, every quiet act of support now gained new significance. The hidden bank balance was not merely money, it was evidence. a silent testament to years of selfless dedication, a mirror to Matthew's own indifference. And when it was revealed, he would understand too late the cost of his arrogance. I allowed myself a rare, small smile, not of triumph, but of quiet confidence. The storm of betrayal had arrived, yes, but so too had the opportunity for resolution. Not for Matthew's comfort, not for his benefit, but for the restoration of dignity, independence, and clarity. This was only the beginning, the first night in which the threads of patience, sacrifice, and foresight began to weave together toward their inevitable conclusion. The Wilcox family would emerge changed, stronger, and vindicated, and Matthew would confront the truth of what he had rejected. The morning after Matthew's message, the house felt hollow, as though the walls themselves had recoiled from his words. Every creak of the floorboards, every draft slipping under the doors, seemed amplified in the quiet of the Wilcox estate. I moved through the rooms with deliberate slowness, my mind replaying the message again and again. We need space from both of you. Even reading it aloud in my own head felt like a betrayal, a reminder that the son I had nurtured, loved, and guided for 27 years had chosen to abandon the very foundation of our family. Lover remained close, silently observing me as I traced my fingers along the familiar furniture, relics of decades of careful accumulation. The polished wood of the dining table, the faded leather of the armchair, the ornate frames holding memories of birthdays and graduations. All of it seemed suddenly foreign. I could feel the weight of her gaze on my back, steady yet heavy with worry, as if she knew the storm I would need to endure alone in my mind before any action could take form. Matthew's absence was a presence in itself. Even when he was physically in the house, he had withdrawn, avoiding shared meals, sidestepping conversations, and retreating to his room for hours on end. His once bright and curious gaze had hardened, replaced by something calculating and distant. The moments when he did speak were brief, clipped, almost dismissive, leaving Laura and me with fragments of the son we once knew. Each interaction felt like walking on ice, fragile, treacherous, threatening to shatter beneath the weight of my unspoken disappointment. Olivia, meanwhile, became a silent witness to the unraveling of our household. Her empathy for her brother did not blind her to his arrogance or the pain he had caused. She would watch Matthew from a distance, noting his restless pacing, the subtle irritations in his gestures, the way his attention wavered toward his devices and away from family, as though he were deliberately erecting barriers to exclude us from his life. Her quiet understanding was both comforting and sobering. She knew, as I did, that patience alone could not mend the breach without deliberate action. For hours, I wandered through the house, examining each room in careful contemplation. I remembered the nights I had worked overtime, often until midnight, ensuring Matthew had everything he needed for school, sports, and later, his career. I remembered the summers I spent repairing this very house, sacrificing vacations and small joys to give him a stable home. I remembered the countless evenings I had spent listening to his trivial complaints, counseling him through minor heartbreaks, guiding him with the patience of a man who understood that wisdom is earned, slowly and carefully. And now, all of it seemed forgotten, as though the years of effort had evaporated into the cold distance of his indifference. Yet amidst the growing despair, I clung to the quiet ember of purpose. The hidden bank balance, tucked away for emergencies, became a source of silent hope. It was more than money, it was a testament to years of sacrifice, a safety net created, not to flaunt wealth, but to preserve dignity. Now it could serve a different purpose, a mirror for Matthew's entitlement, a revelation he could not ignore. The knowledge that I held this secret gave me a strange steadiness, a reassurance that the balance of power in our family had not shifted entirely, that patience and foresight could restore equilibrium where arrogance had prevailed. Days passed with agonizing slowness. Matthew's behavior grew colder, more deliberate, as if he were testing the limits of his own audacity. He refused to join family dinners, retreated from conversations, and spoke with a clipped tone whenever addressed. Even the small gestures of affection that had once marked his presence, handshakes, casual smiles, shared laughter, were absent, replaced with indifference and subtle disdain. Each act, no matter how small, struck like a reminder of the growing chasm between parent and child. Lavra and I exchanged glances more often now, silent communications that conveyed years of shared understanding. Neither of us spoke of punishment or confrontation. We understood that Matthew needed to reach the precipice of realization himself. The balance we had maintained for decades, the delicate equilibrium of love, guidance, and silent authority was shifting. And while the immediate sting of rejection was sharp, I knew that time, patience, and strategic revelation could turn this betrayal into a lesson he would not forget. I began observing Matthew with renewed attention, noting details I had once overlooked. The way he avoided eye contact when I entered the room, the subtle flinches when I approached discussions of responsibility, the quiet frustration when his plans conflicted with family expectations. Each observation was recorded in my mind, a ledger of small betrayals that had accumulated unnoticed over the years. I did not dwell on anger. I catalogued, I measured, I prepared. Every slight, every distant glance, every hint of entitlement became part of a larger design, one that would culminate not in confrontation, but in revelation. There were moments, of course, when the sorrow pressed heavily upon me. I remembered Matthew as a boy, climbing onto my lap after a nightmare, clutching my hand with trust so absolute that it seemed unbreakable. I remembered guiding him through adolescence, shielding him from mistakes, counseling him through heartbreak, encouraging him when he doubted himself. The contrast between that child and the man who had sent the message demanding space was stark, a painful reminder that the passage of time can reveal truths we are unprepared to face. And yet, the spark of resolve persisted. The hidden bank balance, accumulated silently over decades, became not just a tool, but a symbol of endurance. Matthew's arrogance would meet its match in the quiet, patient strategy I had crafted long before this betrayal. The revelation would not be dramatic, not confrontational. It would be clear, undeniable, and complete. He would understand, perhaps too late, the extent of our sacrifices and the dignity and independence we had quietly secured for ourselves. I spent long hours reflecting, wandering through the rooms of our home, feeling the echoes of the past intertwine with the tension of the present. Every photograph, every memento, every artifact of our shared history whispered reminders of what had been given and what had been dismissed. The emotional weight was immense, but it reinforced my understanding. Matthew's choices were his own, and while I had loved, guided, and sacrificed, the lesson he needed to learn could only unfold through patience, precision, and inevitability. Lavra moved beside me quietly one evening, setting a cup of tea on the table. The warmth of her gesture reminded me of all we had endured together, all the years of silent support, shared burdens, and mutual understanding. She did not ask what I planned, nor did I volunteer. Words were unnecessary. The bond we shared, forged over decades of struggle and devotion, was sufficient to sustain us. Together, we would navigate the storm Matthew had created, and together we would emerge stronger, unshaken in our dignity, guided by foresight and love tempered with patience. The days stretched into weeks. Matthew's absence from family life became more pronounced, each interaction marked by deliberate detachment. And while the initial shock had dulled into a dull ache, it was replaced by a simmering tension, a quiet anticipation. I knew that when the time came, the hidden truth would reveal itself, and the lessons of a lifetime of sacrifice would be unmistakable. The seeds of reckoning had been planted, nurtured silently, and would bear fruit at the precise moment of revelation. In that silent tension, I felt both sorrow and certainty. Betrayal by one's own child is a wound unlike any other, intimate, piercing, and lingering. Yet, within it lies the potential for transformation, for clarity, for justice delivered without malice. I would wait, I would observe, and when the time was right, the balance would be restored. Matthew would see the truth, and Lavra and I would embrace the life we had quietly earned, independent and unshaken, the architects of our own dignity. The storm outside mirrored the one within me, fierce and relentless. Yet the fire in the hearth flickered, warm and steady, a reminder that amidst turmoil, patience and foresight endure. This was the night before revelation, the calm before the storm of reckoning. And as I sat in the flickering light, I allowed myself a single thought. The past had been cruelly overlooked, but the future carefully measured, patiently orchestrated would honor the sacrifices that had been made and teach the lessons that Matthew had refused to learn on his own. The morning sunlight crept hesitantly through the curtains, spilling across the living room where the air still carried the residue of weeks of tension. I sat quietly, my hands clasped over the edge of the desk, the faint creak of the floorboards beneath me echoing the rhythm of my thoughts. Each moment that passed felt charged, loaded with anticipation. I knew the time had come to reveal what Matthew had never noticed, what he had taken for granted all these years, the fruits of decades of sacrifice, preserved quietly, waiting for the moment. They would speak for themselves. The hidden bank balance had been a secret for years, tucked away under careful management, untouched, unseen, yet growing steadily, as a silent testament to all I had endured. This was not simply money, it was proof, a symbol of the life I had built for my family, of nights spent working long after exhaustion had claimed my body, of dreams postponed, so that my children could thrive. Matthew had never known, and that ignorance, born of entitlement and distance, would now meet the reality he had long ignored. I retrieved the documents I had kept hidden, a meticulous collection of accounts, statements, and records, each a marker of foresight and restraint. As I spread them across the desk, the numbers glowed with the quiet authority of a life carefully managed. Lavra stood beside me, observing, her presence steady, her quiet confidence, a reminder of the partnership that had weathered decades of trials. Olivia lingered nearby, her eyes reflecting a mixture of awe, satisfaction, and the unspoken knowledge that her parents' patience was about to be vindicated. Matthew entered the room hesitantly, his expression a careful mask, concealing perhaps a hint of curiosity or a trace of defiance. He had been distant for weeks, avoiding interaction, retreating behind screens and excuses, believing that space alone could redefine our relationship. He had no idea that the moment of reckoning had quietly arrived, that the foundation he had once dismissed was about to assert itself with clarity. I watched him, my heart heavy yet steady. As he noticed the documents on the desk, his eyes widened imperceptibly at first, then widened further as comprehension began to seep in. The realization struck slowly, painfully. The life he had assumed was effortless. Security he had taken for granted. The comfort he had believed was his. Birthright, it had all been earned, nurtured, and preserved quietly by hands he had now failed to honor. A flicker of panic crossed his face. He attempted explanations, pleas, gestures meant to bridge a gap he had widened, but the damage had been measured, calculated, and inevitable. Lavra and I exchanged a brief glance, silent communication passing between us. No words were needed. We had endured the months of coldness, the subtle betrayals, the casual dismissal of everything we had given. And now the scales had shifted. The balance of power once assumed by entitlement was unmistakably ours. Matthew's pleas grew more desperate, his voice rising in a mixture of frustration and fear, yet it was too late. The revelations were absolute, tangible, undeniable. He saw the evidence of years of careful sacrifice, the bank balance that had been hidden, not to conceal wealth, but to protect dignity and ensure independence. Every dollar, every account, every meticulous record bore witness to a life dedicated not to indulgence, but to securing stability and respect. A life he had failed to acknowledge until this moment. And yet, despite the shock and the visible remorse, we did not respond with immediate reconciliation. The lessons of a lifetime are not imparted through anger or confrontation, but through quiet consequences and undeniable truth. Matthew had dismissed love, taken patience for granted, and neglected the very foundations upon which his life had been built. It was time he felt the weight of that oversight, the reality of the independence we had quietly earned. Without a word, Lavra and I began preparations for our departure. The beautiful house we had envisioned, purchased quietly over years of careful planning, awaited us, a home built not out of entitlement, but out of foresight and sacrifice. As we moved through the rooms, each step deliberate, each moment purposeful, Matthew's eyes followed, wide and increasingly frantic. The realization settled in fully. He had been abandoned not through malice, but through the deliberate choice to claim independence and dignity that he had previously denied us. He begged, of course. The words tumbled from him in a mixture of fear, shame, and desperation. But there was no turning back. Our decision was final. The months of patience, the years of silent endurance had led to this moment, and we would not undo it. The independence we had worked tirelessly to secure would not be sacrificed. For his repentance, Matthew would learn painfully that respect is earned, not assumed, and that the consequences of neglecting those who love us are absolute. As we stepped into our new home, sunlight streaming across wide open spaces, and the scent of fresh paint mingling with the promise of a life reclaimed, a sense of peace settled over me. For the first time in weeks, perhaps months, the weight on my chest eased. The betrayal had been real, sharp, and intimate, but the resolution, measured and complete, restored dignity, stability, and a quiet triumph that no words could fully capture. Olivia followed, a subtle smile on her face, understanding without explanation that we had not merely survived, but had taken control of the narrative that Matthew had attempted to dominate. Laura's hand rested on mine, firm and reassuring, a silent acknowledgement that together we had navigated not just the practicalities of life, but the complexities of betrayal and the triumph of measured justice. Matthew's presence faded into the background, his pleas now hollow against the undeniable truth that he had ignored for too long. Our life, carefully and patiently secured, unfolded before us, a testament to resilience, foresight, and the quiet power of self-respect. The lesson was clear. Love and sacrifice are not licenses for entitlement, and those who fail to recognize them must face the consequences of their own actions. As I stood in the sunlight of our new home, I allowed myself a final reflection, the moral of our journey crystallizing with vivid clarity. Life does not guarantee gratitude, respect, or loyalty, but it does reward patience, foresight, and steadfastness. The consequences of neglect, ingratitude, and arrogance are real, and the choices we make in response define the dignity and independence we claim for ourselves. And I asked myself, as I had often asked, in quieter moments before, if someone you sacrificed everything for turned against you, could you find the strength to walk away? The answer, I knew, was ours alone. And in walking away, we had claimed not just independence, but the quiet, enduring satisfaction of having lived rightly and taught the ultimate lesson without ever raising a hand in anger. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you love, can you forgive or walk away? Comment below and share your thoughts.